Welcome, Bond fans and cinephiles, to WN Movie Talk. I am Trev, your host, and today we are continuing our 007 project with something truly special, a deep dive into the world of James Bond. This series is dedicated to exploring every corner of the 007 universe, and today we're starting right at the very cinematic beginning with the film that introduced us to the most iconic spy in cinematic history, with Dr. No. Now, this isn't just another movie review. We're going in depth, exploring everything from the original Fleming novel to the birth of Eon Productions and the casting of the one and only Sean Connery. We'll uncover the tidbits of trivia, behind the scenes stories, and the legacy that Dr. No left behind, not just as a film, but as a foundation for a global phenomenon that's still going strong today. I'll be breaking down what worked in Dr. No and what didn't, and how it all contributed to the unstoppable Bond franchise that we know and love today. Whether you're a long-time fan or new to this series, there is something here for everyone. So please sit back, pour yourself a martini, shaken, not stirred, of course, and let's dive into the world of Dr. No. Albert R. Broccoli, affectionately known by his friends, family and colleagues as Cubby, had been deeply immersed in the film industry for many years. He started his career in the 1930s, working his way up from humble beginnings as a gopher. Over time, he made a name for himself as a producer, particularly with Warwick Films, which he co-founded with Irving Allen. They made a series of successful adventure films, which gave Broccoli a solid foundation in the genre that would later become crucial for Bond. In fact, that's why he wanted those film rights so badly. He had done for years, but they were owned by someone else, Harry Saltzman. Harry Saltzman came from a diverse background. He'd worked in theatre before moving into films, where he displayed a natural ability for finding and developing scripts and talent. His previous successes included a string of well-received British films. Saltzman's acquisition of the Bond film rights is a fascinating story of opportunism and foresight. In the early 1960s, Harry Saltzman was a well-established figure in the British film industry by the time he came across Ian Fleming's James Bond novels, which he saw as having the potential to make a great film series. He had a reputation for being a sharp and savvy producer. Up until now, the film rights to Fleming's Bond novels were not yet in the hands of anyone with a clear plan to bring them to the screen. Saltzman recognised the opportunity and moved quickly. He managed to acquire the rights to the Bond novels, which was a significant coup given the popularity of the books and the potential for a successful film franchise. Saltzman's acquisition was driven by his belief that Fleming's character had the potential to become a major film icon. He saw an opportunity not just for a single film, but for a series of films that could capitalise on Bond's popularity and grow in interest in spy stories and action films in general. However, Saltzman wasn't able to handle the production on his own. He needed someone who could manage the film's production aspects and bring the project to fruition, which was when he met Cubby Broccoli. Broccoli had been working in the film industry for years and had a wealth of experience in producing large-scale films. When the two men came together, their combined skills and resources were a perfect match. Saltzman had the rights and the creative vision, while Broccoli brought the production expertise necessary to make the films a reality. The partnership led to the formation of Eon Productions, everything or nothing, and they were about to become forever associated with the Bond brand, as much as, if not more so, than Fleming himself. Eon Productions, or Everything or Nothing, would be so much more than just the name of a production company, but also became the all-important mantra in the production of the Bond movies. Eon Productions operated like a family business, a sentiment which is warmly reflected in the documentary series from my Bond DVD collection. In this amazing series, cast and crew members fondly recount their production experiences, expressing pride in being part of the team. From scriptwriters to costume designers, directors to stunt coordinators, composers to the tea lady, everyone played a crucial role. The collaborative atmosphere meant that ideas from all team members were valued and considered. Each individual worked diligently, not only to uphold the family ethos, but also to deliver increasingly grand and captivating adventures on screen. The collective efforts aimed to surpass the previous box office records, draw larger audiences to theatres and remain faithful to Fleming's original vision. And they would start what would become a stratospheric journey with the modest beginnings of Dr. No. Dr. No is the sixth novel by Ian Fleming. First published in 1958, the story begins with Bond being assigned to investigate the disappearance of John Strangways, the head of MI6's Station J in Jamaica, and his secretary. Despite the rumour mill suggesting that the agent and his secretary had presumed to have eloped together, M sends Bond to Jamaica, where he begins to unravel the mystery surrounding Strangway's disappearance. His investigation leads Bond to Crab Key, a remote island owned by enigmatic Dr. Julius No. As Bond delves deeper into the investigation, he discovers that Dr. No is a megalomaniac with a ruthless streak, using the island for his nefarious schemes involving missile sabotage. On Crab Key, Bond teams up with Honeychile Ryder, a beautiful shell diver who has her own reasons for being on the island, namely scraping together a little money selling conch shells to dealers. They are captured by Dr. No's men and brought to his lair, where they learn about his elaborate plan to disrupt American missile tests from the nearby Cape Canaveral. Dr. No reveals his background and his obsession with power and control, explaining that his hands were replaced with metal claws due to a past experiment gone wrong. Bond endures a torturous obstacle course designed by Dr. No to test human endurance, but ultimately he overcomes it, leading to a final confrontation where he manages to kill Dr. No by burying him under a massive grano, thus thwarting his plan and escaping the island with Honeychile. The novel concludes with Bond reporting back to MI6, once again having thwarted a major threat to global security. When Eon Productions decided to make Dr. No as the first James Bond film, there were several reasons behind their choice. First off, Dr. No had a straightforward, action-packed plot that was mostly contained. It featured exotic locations, a compelling villain, and plenty of opportunities for thrilling sequences, which were crucial for capturing the audience's attention right out the gate. Additionally, Dr. No was one of the more recent novels in Fleming's series at the time, and it had a contemporary feel that resonated with the early 60s. There was also a practical aspect to the decision. Dr. No was a relatively self-contained story, well suited for a relatively low-budget film adaptation. It didn't require a lot of backstory or complex setups involving multiple characters and plot lines from previous books, which made it easier to introduce James Bond to the world without needing extensive exposition. There wasn't too much location hopping either, with the majority of the movie taking place in Jamaica. Saltzman and Broccoli, the producers behind Eon Productions, were also strategic in choosing Dr. No because it allowed them to establish the Bond formula that would become iconic. Charismatic hero, a megalomaniac villain, beautiful women, high-stakes action. This formula proved to be a winning combination that they could build upon in subsequent films. When Harry Saltzman and Albert Broccoli first met with Ian Fleming about making the James Bond movies, Fleming was actually pretty sceptical. He had this strong vision of Bond in his head, and he was worried that someone else might not do justice to his character. After all, he had been approached by various people before, and not everyone had taken his creation seriously. The initial meetings were crucial. Saltzman and Broccoli had this grand vision of turning Bond into a successful franchise, and they were eager to convince Fleming that they were the right people for the job. Broccoli, with his extensive background in film production, and Saltzman, with his creative flair, pitched their idea to Fleming. They made it clear that they wanted to stay true to the essence of his stories, while also making the films appealing to a wider audience. Their pitch must have been pretty compelling because, gradually, Fleming's scepticism started to fade. As they continued working together and developing Dr. No, Fleming saw that Saltzman and Broccoli were serious about respecting the character and delivering high-quality films. Eon Productions had shopped the movie around to all Hollywood studios for funding, but all had turned it down. It was too British, too sexy, too violent. Eventually, United Artists took the plunge and greenlit the movie. United Artists, UA, was founded in 1919 by four of the biggest names in the film industry: Charlie Chaplin, Mary Pickford, Douglas Fairbanks and D.W. Griffith. They established the company to gain more creative control over their work, to provide a platform for independent filmmakers, free from the constraints of the major studios. Their ideals centred around artistic freedom, innovation, and giving artists the ability to produce and distribute their films without the interference of studio executives. UA quickly became known for its commitment to supporting high-quality, diverse films that often push the boundaries of traditional Hollywood fare. Throughout its history, UA have produced and distributed a wide range of acclaimed and commercially successful films, including classics like The African Queen, 1951, and Some Like It Hot, 1959. When producers Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman sought to bring Ian Fleming's James Bond series to the screen, UA's reputation for taking risks and supporting innovative projects made it an ideal partner. Broccoli and Saltzman formed Eon Productions and approached UA with their vision for a series of films based on the Bond novels. UA's willingness to finance and distribute Dr. No in 1962, the first Bond film, was crucial. They provided the necessary budget and support while allowing Broccoli and Saltzman the creative freedom to stay true to Fleming's vision. UA's backing enabled the project team to assemble a top-notch cast and crew, and to invest in high production values which were essential for the series' success. The partnership between UA and Eon Productions proved to be a winning combination, resulting in one of the most successful and enduring franchises in film's history. UA's commitment to artistic freedom and innovation helped shape the unique style and global appeal of the James Bond films, and through troubled times the Bond films would prove to be united artists' saving grace. However, Dr. No had a very limited budget, especially considered the ambitious nature of the project. With just $1.2 million to work with, the producers had to be exceptionally resourceful. Other films from the same year had far more money to work with. World War II D-Day classic The Longest Day had a budget of $7.5 million. David Lean's Lawrence of Arabia was filmed with a budget of $15 million. Even the courtroom drama To Kill a Mockingbird had $2 million budget, double that of Bond's, which makes you appreciate even more what you were getting for the money on the screen with Bond's debut adventure. This tight budget posed several challenges, but also led to some creative solutions that ultimately enhanced the movie's charm. Because of the financial constraints, the film couldn't afford lavish sets or elaborate special effects that it required. Instead, the team focused on practical effects and clever set designs. For instance, they made use of existing locations in Jamaica, which not only saved money but also gave the film a more authentic and exotic feel. The simplicity of these settings and the resourceful use of what was available added this sense of realism that might have been lost with a bigger budget and more artificial sets. So when it came to turning Dr. No into a movie, Broccoli and Saltzman knew they had to make it as visually exciting as possible. The book was a great foundation, but they needed more action and compelling screen presence to really grab the audience's attention. They would need a fantastic team to help them realise their dream on such a low budget, and through connections made through his production company Warwick Films, Cubby had a few contacts that he knew he could call upon. Terence Young was the man who shaped the early Bond films. He also played a big role in transforming Sean Connery into James Bond, teaching him how to be smooth and polished. Young had carved out a diverse career in the film industry, contributing to a variety of genres from war film to dramas, and had collaborated with Cubby on a handful of movies under the banner of Warwick Films, a production company well known for making action-packed and often exotic adventures. Terence Young was born in Shanghai in 1915 and educated in the UK, and he had a background that seemed destined for adventure and intrigue, therefore brought a unique blend of international sophistication and British sensibility to his work. Young began his career in the film industry as a screenwriter in the late 1930s. His career interrupted, as so many had been, by the Second World War. During World War II, he served in the British Army and participated in significant military operations, experiences that added to his understanding of action and espionage. After the war, Young transitioned to directing. By the 1950s, he had directed several notable films, including Valley of the Eagles, 1951, a suspense thriller set in Scandinavia, The Red Beret, 1953, a war film about British paratroopers which showcased his ability to handle action sequences, and Serious Charge, 1959, a drama addressing serious societal issues, showing his versatility. He also directed for Cubby's Warwick Films, a war movie with the familiar title of No Time to Die, 1958, which, as we now know, would become the title of Daniel Craig's final movie. Not just borrowing a great Bond-sounding title, but also paying homage to the director's importance as one of the founding fathers of the James Bond franchise. Young's pre-Bond films demonstrated his talent for handling a range of genres, particularly action and suspense. His background experience, discipline and understanding of both the military and cinematic worlds made him a perfect fit for bringing Ian Fleming's iconic character to life on the big screen. And his work laid the groundwork for the series' signature style, combining sophisticated espionage with high-octane action, and his debonair lifestyle was one that he shared with Bond. In 1962, he was selected to direct the first James Bond film, Dr. No, and his success would lead him to return for From Russia with Love, 1963, and Thunderball, 1965. His work with Warwick Films laid the groundwork for the future success of the James Bond series, as it provided both a training ground for thrilling narratives and a playground for experimenting with larger-than-life characters and plots, and Cubby knew that Young could handle these larger productions with ingenuity and professionalism, producing a body of work worthy of merit. For the script, they brought in Richard Maybaum and Joanne Harwood. Maybaum was a seasoned playwright and screenwriter who knew how to craft a compelling story, and Harwood, she had plenty of experience in the industry, first as a continuity supervisor and then as a successful screenwriter, and so she helped shape the film's narrative. Ken Adams was hired as production designer, and his set designs were revolutionary. Before his association with Bond, Adams had displayed his visual style and designs on movies such as Around the World in 80 Days, 1956, Ben-Hur, 1959, and The Night of the Demon, 1957, and he took home an award from the Moscow Film Festival for his set design on The Trials of Oscar Wilde, 1960. Adams would become another key collaborator in the creation of the Bond style. Despite the considerable budgetary constraints, he created visually stunning and memorable sets. Adams' work added a layer of visual sophistication on such a shoestring budget, and his aesthetic simulating villain's lair would also go on to become a hallmark in the Bond series. His career would stretch far beyond Bond too, working on movies such as Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove, 1965, The Ipcress File, 1965, and many years later, films as iconic as The Addams Family Values, 1993, and The Madness of King George, 1994. He would also play his hand at visually realising another Ian Fleming adaptation when he designed the iconic car Chitty Chitty Bang Bang in 1968 from Fleming's brief foray into children's literature. Strange fact, the screenplays for Chitty Chitty Bang Bang as well as the script for You Only Live Twice would both be worked on by iconic children's writer Roald Dahl. When it came to casting James Bond for Dr. No, finding the right actor was a big deal. They needed someone who could bring Ian Fleming's suave, sophisticated and deadly spy to life. Naturally, a lot of names were tossed around before they settled on Sean Connery. Cary Grant was one of the top choices. He had the charm and the looks, but he was only willing to commit to one film, which didn't fit with the long-term vision for the series that the producers had in mind. Grant was also working on Hitchcock's North by Northwest around this time, which was a thriller to rival Bond's modern approach to action filmmaking. James Mason was another strong contender to play Bond, but like Grant, he also wasn't interested in signing up for multiple movies. Then there was Patrick McGoohan, known for his role in the TV series Danger Man. He had the right presence and was offered the part, but he turned it down reportedly due to concerns about the character's promiscuity and violence. Richard Johnson was also considered, but he passed on the role as well. And as for Roger Moore, who would later become famous for playing Bond, he was approached but wasn't available at the time due to commitments to his television series, The Saint. So the list was narrowing down, and then Sean Connery came into the picture. Connery wasn't a big star at the time. In fact, he was relatively unknown. He had had some acting experience, but not much to his name. Broccoli wasn't impressed. He thought that Connery was unkempt, his clothes dishevelled. Fleming was also violently opposed to the idea of having a Scottish Bond, giving the actor biting monikers such as that working-class Scot. Fleming had imagined Bond as a more refined, upper-class Englishman. Ideally, he wanted David Niven, and certainly Connery, with his working-class Scottish background, didn't quite fit the mould. Fleming thought Connery was too unrefined and rugged for the role. However, it was Dana Broccoli, Cubby's wife, who saw something in Connery, and she persuaded her husband to give him a chance. She thought that his ruggedness gave him a certain charm and a certain roughness that could bring a different edge to Bond. After auditioning him, and some screen tests, Broccoli and Saltzman were also convinced that Connery was the right choice. They saw his potential to embody Bond's complexity, someone who could be both charming and lethal. Before being cast as James Bond in Dr. No, 1962, Sean Connery had had a varied and somewhat modest career. Born in Edinburgh, Scotland in 1930, Connery came from humble beginnings and held a series of odd jobs before turning to acting. He joined the Royal Navy but was discharged due to a medical condition. Connery then pursued bodybuilding and even competed in the 1950 Mr. Universe contest, which indirectly led him to the world of theatre and film. He began his acting career in the early 1950s, initially taking on small roles in British films and television series. His early film appearances included minor roles in movies such as No Road Back, 1957, Hell Drivers, also 1957, and Another Time, Another Place, 1958, where he worked alongside established stars like Lana Turner. One of Connery's more notable early roles was in the Disney adventure film Darby O'Gill and The Little People, 1959, where he played Michael McBride, a young Irishman. Despite its whimsical nature, the film allowed Connery to demonstrate his charm and screen presence, albeit in a much different context than his later work as Bond. However, none of these roles catapulted him to stardom, and he remained relatively unknown in Hollywood until his big break came with the casting of James Bond. As filming began, Connery's portrayal started to win people over, including Fleming. Connery brought a physicality and charisma to Bond. He made Bond feel real and relatable while still being the cool, sophisticated spy. Fleming eventually warmed up to Connery's interpretation too, especially after seeing how successful Dr. No became. In fact, he was so impressed with the star that he even gave Bond some Scottish heritage in the later novels as a nod to Connery's performance. By the time Dr. No was in production, Fleming was also impressed with how seriously Broccoli and Saltzman were taking the adaptation and how committed they were to capturing Bond's essence on screen. Ursula Andress was cast as Honey Rider. Her emergence from the sea in white bikini would become an iconic moment in cinematic history. Ursula Andress, Switzerland-born and raised in a multilingual household, became fluent in several languages, which later proved advantageous in her acting career. Before her breakthrough in Hollywood, Andress led a life marked by international exposure and a series of personal and professional experiences. She moved to Rome as a teenager, where she initially worked as an art model. Her striking beauty quickly attracted attention, and she began appearing in Italian and French films. However, these roles were generally small and did not garner much attention. In 1955, she moved to the United States and signed a contract with Paramount Pictures, but her career in Hollywood initially stalled due to limited opportunities and her struggles with the English language. Despite these challenges, Andress's perseverance paid off when she was cast as Honey Rider in Dr. No, 1962. Her appearance in that iconic scene and that indelible image of her in that white bikini, knife sheathed to her thigh, instantly catapulted her to international fame and established her as a sex symbol of the 1960s. This role not only defined her career, but also paved the way for a successful acting career in both European and American cinema. Joseph Wiseman played the villain, Dr. No, bringing a cold, calculating presence that set the template for future Bond villains. The casting of Joseph Wiseman as Dr. No in the first James Bond, while effective at the time, has not aged particularly well, especially considering the modern perspectives on representation and diversity. Wiseman, a character actor of European descent, was cast to play Dr. Julius No, a character of Chinese-German descent. He was heavily made up to appear more ethnically ambiguous. This practice, known as yellowface, involved using makeup and prosthetics to alter Wiseman's appearance, a technique that is now widely recognised as problematic and culturally insensitive. At the time, the decision to cast Wiseman and use heavy makeup might have been driven by several factors, including a limited pool of actors who were considered bankable stars for such roles, and a lack of awareness or sensitivity towards issues of race and representation in Hollywood. However, contemporary audiences and critics view this casting choice as a reflection of the industry's historical insensitivity towards accurately representing different cultures and ethnicities. James Bond's films have sparked various controversies over racial depictions and insensitivities throughout the years, and have gained more scrutiny in recent years as societal attitudes have evolved. Early Bond films, starting with Dr. No in 1962, included several racial stereotypes and insensitivities that were largely overlooked by the audiences of the era. Dr. No also features caricatured portrayals of Jamaican characters, and a lot of the cast, including one or two of the Bond girls themselves, had to have their eyes wired back to achieve the stereotypically slanted eyes required to make the actors seem oriental. The depiction of Asian characters in You Only Live Twice, 1967, with Sean Connery's Bond undergoing a transformation to appear Japanese, also draws criticism for its lack of authenticity and sensitivity. As the series progressed, characters from diverse backgrounds were often relegated to stereotypical roles or portrayed in ways that reinforced negative stereotypes. For example, the blaxploitation influence in Live and Let Die, 1973, depicted African American characters primarily as criminals and voodoo practitioners. Similarly, The Man with the Golden Gun, 1974, featured characters that perpetuated stereotypes about East Asians. These portrayals were not widely condemned at the time due to a lack of awareness and sensitivity towards racial issues. However, with the rise of civil rights movement and increasing awareness, the criticisms began to grow. It wasn't until the late 20th and early 21st centuries that the Bond franchise started to take notice and make more deliberate efforts to become inclusive. The casting of Jeffrey Wright as Felix Leiter, a traditionally white character in Casino Royale 2006, marked a significant step towards diversification. Moreover, Skyfall 2012 and Spectre 2015 saw the inclusion of Naomi Harris as Miss Moneypenny, reimagining her character as less of an office floozy and a far more capable female agent who just happened to be of African descent. The latest Bond film, No Time to Die 2021, took inclusivity further by casting Lashana Lynch as Nomi, a black female agent who temporarily takes on the 007 designation. This marked a significant shift in the franchise's approach, acknowledging the changing demographics and expectations of modern audiences. By embracing more accurate and respectful representations of different cultures and ethnicities, the Bond series has not only stayed relevant and authentic, but has also set a better example for modern filmmaking. This shift aligns with a broader trend in the entertainment industry towards greater diversity and inclusion, recognising the importance of authentic representation and the value that it brings to storytelling. Jacques Claude was cast as Bond's CIA ally, Felix Leiter, in Dr. No, and as previously mentioned, he would be replaced by other actors in subsequent films. Bernard Lee was cast as M, Bond's boss, and his authoritative portrayal would appear in 11 Bond films. Lois Maxwell played Miss Moneypenny, and her flirtatious yet professional interactions with Bond became a beloved fixture in the series. She would appear in 14 films. With Dr. No, the movie, as with the novel, the story begins with Bond being dispatched to Jamaica to investigate the disappearance of British intelligence officer Dr. Strangways and his secretary. Upon arrival, Bond teams up with CIA agent Felix Leiter and local fisherman Quarrel to uncover the mystery. Their investigation leads them to Crab Key, a secluded island owned by the reclusive Dr. No, who is suspected of disrupting American missile launches from Cape Canaveral. On Crab Key, Bond encounters the beautiful Honey Rider, shell diver played by Ursula Andress, who is also unwelcome on the island. Bond and Ryder are captured by Dr. No's henchmen, taken to his lair, where they meet Dr. No, a sinister scientist with metal hands. Dr. No reveals his affiliation with Spectre, Special Executive for Counterintelligence, Terrorism, Revenge and Extortion, and his plan to use a nuclear-powered radio beam to interfere with the US space program. Bond is subjected to a series of torturous trials but manages to escape, sabotaging Dr. No's facility in the process. In the climactic showdown, Bond defeats Dr. No by pushing him into a pool of boiling reactor coolant. With the villain's plan thwarted and the lair destroyed, Bond rescues Honey Rider and they escape by boat. The film ends with Bond and Ryder floating in the ocean, having successfully neutralised the threat posed by Dr. No. In the novel, the story is obviously more detailed and expansive, focusing on Bond's methodical investigation into the disappearance of Strangways, whilst also delving deeper into Bond's own character, showcasing his deductive skills and resilience throughout the various challenges he faces. The film, on the other hand, condenses the plot to fit a more streamlined and visually engaging format, For example, while Dr. No's grueling endurance test for Bond in the novel is elaborate and extended, the film simplifies this sequence to maintain pace and excitement for the audience. However, as early as this first James Bond film, many of the elements that would become trademarks of the series would be established, setting the stage for one of the most enduring franchises in cinematic history. The first Bond movie begins after the United Artists logo, and then we meet our man, courtesy of the visual compositions of Maurice Binder. It's the very first time we see that now iconic gun barrel sequence. It seems a bit odd seeing Bond in a trilby, but there you go. Right from the start, this gun barrel sequence sets the tone, letting the audience know that they were in for something special. There's no pre-credit sequence here in Dr. No. That will not be introduced until the following movie, From Russia with Love. It's just the gun barrel, and then, when the lens of the gun barrel falls red with blood, the circle becomes emerged with many other circles, all of which become animated for the opening credit sequence, a series of dots and circles dancing and multiplying in all of their 60s psychedelic glory as the iconic theme tune kicks in. And boy, does it kick in. The movie's score, composed by Monty Norman, featured the iconic James Bond theme, which John Barry had been brought in solely to arrange from a piece that Norman had previously written for a play and discarded. That guitar riff is now infamous, and that brassy sound created by Barry added to the audio style of the movie and would become synonymous with Bond. In fact, editor Peter Hunt would keep replaying the Bond theme throughout Dr. No alongside our hero, making up for the somewhat lacklustre score that Norman provided. Barry's arrangement of the James Bond film obviously made an impact, because he would go on to secure the gig of scoring From Russia with Love, and thereon would go on to become an integral part of the Bond family in those early years, returning to score 11 movies in total. There would be an ongoing dispute between John Barry and Monty Norman, which would ebb and flow over the years over who actually wrote that now famous theme tune. The courts eventually sided with Norman. Regardless, John Barry's scores for the Bond films are timeless, characterised by their lush orchestration and innovative use of brass and strings that capture the adventurous and sophisticated essence of the character and the locations. And it was all there at the start, in the opening seconds of this very first film, just with that James Bond theme. It significantly contributed to the film's atmosphere. However, unfortunately for us, John Barry didn't score the rest of this movie. Monty Norman was tasked with that job. Monty Norman's work on Dr. No's soundtrack is characterised by its eclectic mix, with ambient calypso tracks being the highlight, creating an authenticity and a link to the tropical locations used in the movie. But the theatrical score that he provided was sadly nothing more than a score of its time, in many places no different than that of a bad TV show from this era. It was an inconsistent score, often too melodramatic or too whimsical, with experimental beeps and boops used as though from a sci-fi show. It was dramatic and extreme 1 minute, cartoonish and campy the next, sometimes even veering into Tom and Jerry territory. Monty Norman's score for Dr. No remains a distinct departure from the more orchestrated and cohesive scores that followed. While it was innovative, experimental and diverse, reflecting a mixture of calypso, jazz and orchestral elements. Unfortunately now, many of those elements have also helped to age this score massively, and it lacks a cohesive stylistic identity with the rest of the franchise. Pieces like Jamaican Rock and Jump Up contribute to the local colour of the film, but do not necessarily reinforce the overarching identity of Bond. The track Under the Mango Tree, featuring both instrumental and vocal versions, is another significant piece of music from the soundtrack. This calypso song, sung by Diana Coupland in the film and Ursula Andress in her iconic beach scene, adds a romantic and exotic touch. The relaxed and easygoing melody contrasts with the tension and action in other parts of the film, providing a softer, more intimate counterpoint. Back to Maurice Binder, creating the iconic opening credits for Dr. No. Binder began his career working in advertising. During his experience in the advertising industry, he developed a keen eye for visual storytelling, engaging compositions, and it played a significant role in shaping his approach to film titles. His advertising work required him to capture the viewer's attention quickly and effectively, a skill that was translated seamlessly into his film projects. Prior to Dr. No, Binder's notable work included designing title sequences for films like the British romantic comedy The Grass is Greener, 1960, starring Cary Grant and Robert Mitchum, and The Mouse That Roared in 1959, satirical comedy starring Peter Sellers. These projects showcased his ability to blend humour, whimsy and creativity, establishing his reputation for innovative and captivating design. When tasked with creating the title sequence for Dr. No, Binder brought a fresh and unconventional approach that set the film apart from others of its time. The Dr. No title sequence begins with vibrant, abstract patterns and immediately grabbed the audience's attention. The sequence also featured a series of coloured dots moving rhythmically across the screen, which created a dynamic visual rhythm that would become a recurring motif in the future Bond films. Additionally, Binder introduced animated silhouetted figures, adding an element of intrigue and style that would become a signature of his work. In the subsequent Bond films, Binder refined and evolved his style, incorporating several signature elements that would become synonymous with the series. One of his key innovations was the seamless blend of live action footage with animation, creating visually striking sequences. For example, in Goldfinger 1964, Binder used projections of key scenes of the movies onto the bodies of golden painted women, enhancing the visual impact. The use of female silhouettes became more pronounced in later films, with Binder often featuring dancing or suggestively posed women to create a sense of allure and mystery. This motif is evident in films like Thunderball 1965, Diamonds Are Forever 1971. Binder also incorporated iconic imagery and symbols related to the film's themes, such as Japanese cultural symbols in You Only Live Twice 1967 and timepieces in On Her Majesty's Secret Service 1969, reflecting the film's exploration of time and change. The silhouetted ladies in the title sequence of Dr. No fade and replaced by the silhouettes of three blind men, cane and begging cup in hand, the blind leading the blind. Slow dissolve and we see these very same men in all their technicoloured glory shuffling through the streets of Kingston, Jamaica, to assassinate British intelligence station chief John Strangways, Timothy Moxon, and his poor innocent secretary. This was a shock to audiences of the early 60s. Cold-blooded murder in broad daylight. No song and dance made about it. In, out. In the book, Fleming refers to these three men as Chigros, Negroes with Chinese blood, adding that they are not a very common mix of the bloods. We soon meet James Bond, Sean Connery, introduced playing baccarat at an exclusive casino in London. This glamorous casino is another Ken Adams set, filmed like many of the Bond movies' interiors at Pinewood Studios in England. Adam worked closely with the director and other members of the production team to ensure that his designs were both visually stunning and practical. By understanding the limitations and needs of the production, he could tailor his designs to fit within the budget while still achieving the desired effect of high society. He focused on creating key visual elements that would draw the audience's attention, allowing for less detail in other parts of the set. This method ensured that most important parts of the set looked impressive, even if the overall budget was very limited. As we meet Bond at the casino for the first time, we're introduced to him slowly. We see him from behind, or in subtle close-ups, we see his cards being selected before the now famous reveal in which he lights his cigarette and with a brooding smoky eyes introduces himself as Bond, James Bond, for the first time. He's mimicking and returning the introduction of the very first Bond girl, Sylvia Trench, played by Eunice Gayson. She introduced herself as Trench, Sylvia Trench. Upon his introduction, the main theme tune, which we have established is already the saving grace of the movie's score, kicks in again, as it constantly will throughout the movie, every time James Bond acts like James Bond. Already at this point it has been repeated 3 or 4 times, and this repetitive use of this theme is already at this point seems like one too many times. Bond has received a call from the head of MI6, Bernard Lee, requesting a meeting in which Bond is instructed to investigate Strangway's disappearance. Bernard Lee would make the role of M his own for many of the films to come, and his office here with its lush wood panelling looks just like the kind of prestigious office that you would expect of the head of MI6. However, this is another Ken Adams budget set, and in the audio commentary on the DVD he discusses the limitations and how he would maximise the aesthetic by using inexpensive and readily available materials to construct the furniture and dressing. He often used plywood and painted canvases to create the illusion of more luxurious and expensive materials, and he used a type of crepe paper to emulate the wood panelling. In future, the movie's budgets would be far greater, and Adams was able to use real wood and leather to dress the sets. In this scene, M is scornful towards Bond, and before he gives him the Strangway assignment, he requests to confiscate the agent's gun, a Beretta, which is revealed to have jammed, and the situation led to Bond being incapacitated for several months and recovering in hospital. If you've been reading the book series, then this is because in the previous adventure, From Russia with Love, Fleming had left Bond for dead, poisoned by a blade in the shoe of Smurfs agent Rosa Klebb. In the film series, From Russia with Love will be the second adventure for our hero, following Dr. No. So perhaps it is here that the very first Bond paradox is created. In M's office, Bond receives his iconic Walther PPK pistol from the armourer Major Boothroyd, played by Peter Burton. This is taken straight from the novel. In the later films, Major Boothroyd is referred to as Q, which stands for quartermaster. Much as in the novel, here the interaction with the quartermaster is quite a normal and almost mundane part of Bond's chosen occupation. However, the concept of Q as a recurring character known for providing Bond with spectacular gadgets is not fully introduced here, nor was it ever fully introduced in any of the books. It's not until the second movie, From Russia with Love, and with the recasting of the character to Desmond Llewellyn, that a new recurring character is created for the movies. We all know now that Q would become a staple in the franchise success, and Llewellyn a national treasure, but here in Dr. No, the producers missed a trick, and the armour is much more practical and far less fantastic. M gives him the details of the Strangway job and orders him to go straight to the airport, but Bond is soon distracted en route when he arrives back at his apartment to find an intruder. Could someone be aware of the mission already? Gun drawn, he throws open his door to find the first female conquest of the series, Sylvia Trench, yet again. She's the girl that we met at the cards table in the casino. It was her who coaxed Bond's now famous introduction. Bond discovers her in his room, playing with his golf set, dressed only in one of his shirts. But he's on immediate business, but this is Bond, and she is already half undressed. Two interesting facts here are that the character of Sylvia Trench was originally intended to have been a recurring character, Bond's girl at home, as actress Euston Gayson explained to us during the DVD's commentary. Another fact is that Gayson was originally cast to play Miss Moneypenny, and Lois Maxwell was cast as Sylvia, but Maxwell got cold feet about playing the more risque role, and the actresses swapped their parts. I can only imagine, upon seeing the ongoing success of Maxwell's role as Moneypenny, how this could have been a source of regret on Gayson's behalf. Maxwell would appear in no less than 14 movies over the next 3 decades. Gayson's Sylvia Trench was dropped after just 2 films. Upon arriving in Jamaica on his mission to investigate the disappearance of Strangway, Bond is monitored arriving at the airport by various parties, the first demonstrations of double dealings, misdirection and red herrings that are to become an integral part of the Bond plot. A driver set to meet him is actually an agent sent to kill him, but when Bond outmanoeuvres him, the agent takes his own life with a cyanide capsule before he can be interrogated, showing us the extreme lengths of those involved in this conspiracy would go in order to cover their tracks and please their elusive boss. Before long, Bond has made some footing on the island, piecing together certain clues and picking up new leads, one of which is Strangway's association with the colourful quarrel, John Kitts-Miller, a local fisherman pictured alongside the missing agent in a photograph. He recognises him as the man who tailed Bond from the airport, and although to begin with we can only assume Quarrel's intentions, it's not long before we learn that Quarrel is assisting Felix Leiter, Jack Lord, CIA agent, also investigating the case. Bond teams up with Quarrel and Pussfella, a bar owner, and Quarrel informs Bond about Crab Key and the mysterious Dr. No. Quarrel appeared already in Bond's history. In the books, we met him as early as the second book, when he assists Bond in his pursuit to derail the plans of mastermind criminal Mr. Big in Live and Let Die. However, the cinematic offering of Live and Let Die, which would be the debut feature for Roger Moore, the character is replaced by Quarrel Jr., a character who's supposed to be Quarrel's son. After all, Quarrel meets his demise in both the book and the film of Dr. No, burnt to a crisp by Dr. No's dragon. When Bond visits Strangway's house, he discovers a geological sample and a receipt from a local meteorologist, Professor Dent, played by actor Anthony Dawson. Dawson was used a lot in the early days of Bond. Not only would his hands double for Blofelds in From Russia with Love and Thunderball, but he was very often called in to act as Bond when auditioning or screen testing for additional roles. Dent makes light of the samples that Strangway had sent him, and then later Dent tries to kill Bond by releasing a tarantula into James's room. The lethal creature was swapped out from the killer centipede found within the pages of the book, possibly for a number of reasons. Centipedes, especially large and venomous ones, are difficult to handle and control on a film set. They pose a greater risk to the actor and crew due to their unpredictable nature and venomous bites. Spiders, particularly tarantulas, are easy to manage and handle in a controlled environment. They are less aggressive and their venom is less dangerous compared to some centipedes. The spider also generates far more fear when shown on film than that of a centipede. The hairy, menacing look of a tarantula adds to the dramatic effect of the scene, enhancing its tension and horror. And besides, tarantulas are easier to train and manipulate for specific movements, allowing for more precise control over the scene's actions. In this movie, they used a piece of glass laid over Sean Connery and let the spider crawl over that. If you look close enough, you can see that the spider isn't actually touching Connery, but it's just walking along the glass in front. But anyway, when the attempt on Bond's life fails, Bond's shoe, bringing a violent crescendo of death upon the hairy beast, Dent has to inform Dr. No, and the set for this scene is classic Ken Adams ingenuity. It's a bare and minimal set. It's simply a room with a chair in it, but the visual power of the scene comes from the vent in the ceiling, which casts deep shadows across the room, adding to the atmosphere of the scene. This look is borrowed for the Freddie Reidenschneider scenes in the Coen brothers' The Man Who Wasn't There, with Coen's cinematographer Roger Deakins capitalising on the stark shadows of the scene to help create tension. As mentioned before, Deakins would go on to become the Bond cinematographer in Skyfall alongside director Sam Mendes. Without seeing Dr. No, we hear his voice, faceless and powerful, which adds to the cloak and dagger trappings of the genre. Clandestine, tyrannical plots revealing themselves to us, just about a step or two ahead of our hero too. Can Bond work out the threads of connection and deception before the enemy have had a chance to act upon their advantage? Dent is obviously a little distressed in this meeting. His inability to fulfil orders could be his demise, but ultimately he is given one more chance to eliminate Bond, which in turn will lead us to one more iconic Bond moment. Bond finds radioactive rocks at Strangway's house, confirming suspicions that he had about Crab Key, and confirming his doubts and suspicions about the fraudulent Professor Dent. So Bond, suspecting there will be another attempt on his life, prepares his bed to look like he's in there, and he sits and waits. It's not long before an arm enters the room, silenced pistol in hand, and pumps the empty bed full of lead. As Dent enters, he is confronted by Bond, who is sat beside the door. The confrontation is another moment that defied Bond. When Dent reaches for his discarded gun and shoots at Bond, there's a click. It's an empty weapon. Bond informs him, "That's a Smith & Wesson, and you've had your sex," and then lazily shoots his PPK at Dent, killing an unarmed man. This act of cold-blooded execution was a stark contrast to the more moralistic heroes of the time, who often avoided killing whenever possible, and the scene was almost demanded to be cut by the censors. Before James Bond first hit the screens in Dr. No, the action film landscape was dominated by a variety of genres, including swashbuckling adventures, westerns, war films and detective stories. These films typically featured straightforward, morally upright heroes. For instance, Errol Flynn starred in many swashbucklers like The Adventures of Robin Hood, 1938, where the hero was noble and fought for justice with clear-cut moral lines. In westerns, heroes like John Wayne epitomised the rugged, honest protagonist who upheld law and order. War films such as The Bridge on the River Kwai, 1957, often portrayed heroic soldiers and officers fighting for their countries with honour and duty. Detective stories and film noirs like The Maltese Falcon, 1941, starring Humphrey Bogart, presented a slightly more complex protagonist but still generally adhered to a moral code. These films often depicted a world where good ultimately triumphed over evil, and the hero, though sometimes flawed, acted out of a clear sense of right and wrong. James Bond, as portrayed in Dr. No, introduced a radically different kind of action hero. Bond operated in very much a morally grey world. Unlike the straightforwardly noble heroes of earlier films, Bond could be ruthless and cold-blooded when necessary. This complexity made Bond a more intriguing and realistic character, resonating with audiences who were growing accustomed to the ambiguities of the Cold War era. One of the most iconic moments in Dr. No is when Ursula Andress, playing Honey Rider, emerges from the sea. As Honey Rider steps onto the beach in her white bikini, complete with a knife strapped to her side, she embodies a mix of innocence and strength that was revolutionary for the time. It's an indelible image, symbolising the ideal Bond girl, strong, stunning, intriguing, and reversed for the opposite sex with a similar shot in Casino Royale, only with Daniel Craig emerging, shirtless and bulging, more muscular than we've seen in a Bond up until now. Honey Rider, surprised to find that Bond was watching her, is initially wary of him, showcasing her independence and survival instincts. However, despite her initial caution, she soon becomes an integral ally in Bond's mission. Her resourcefulness and bravery complement Bond's skills, making her more than just a damsel in distress. This dynamic set a new standard for female characters in action films, where they could be both beautiful and formidable. One notable difference in the character of Honey Rider is when she explains her upbringing. In the book, she has a traumatic backstory involving revenge against an abusive man, adding depth to her character and allowing us to see an almost caring side of Bond's nature. The film tones down this aspect, making light of her upbringing somewhat, especially as she tells Bond how she stuck a Black Widow spider into the mosquito net of an abusive landlord just to kill him. Bond's reaction to this is humorous. When she reads his startled expression, she asks innocently, "Did I do wrong?" To which he replies, "Well, it wouldn't do to make a habit of it." In the book, there's not much of a laugh to be had when she's telling her story, and it brings out a side of Bond that is morally outdated. Ursula Andress, despite her captivating screen presence, had all of her dialogue recorded by another actress, and her role as Honey Rider was dubbed. Andress, a Swiss actress, had a noticeable accent that the producers felt would not suit the character's portrayal as a native Jamaican. As a result, her lines were dubbed by voice actress Nikki Vandersil. Vandersil was a renowned voice actress who had dubbed several female characters in the Bond series, helping to maintain the glamorous and exotic yet distinctly English-speaking tone that the producers wanted for the franchise. Andress's dubbing did not detract from her performance, rather it complemented her visual impact. Her physical portrayal of Honey Rider combined with Vandersil's voice created a seamless character that left a lasting impression on audiences. Audio dubbing was quite common in the era and allowed for a clear, articulate delivery of lines, which was crucial for the character's credibility and the film's overall coherence. Some dubbing is better suited to others. In one shot, a coloured soldier for Dr. No is clearly and unabashedly dubbed by a very British-sounding actor, imitating the black man. When the trio is attacked and Quarrel is killed by Dr. No's dragon tank, Bond and Ryder are captured and taken to Dr. No's elaborate underground lair. It's a shame when Quarrel dies, as his character did seem to have a lot of depth to it, compared to many on the screen in this adaptation, even despite its dated and somewhat patronising representation of Jamaican locals. But his death, although a pivotal moment in the movie, is nothing more than a device to ramp up the stakes, and is soon passed over and forgotten. In the novel, Quarrel's death is another notch in Bond's own resolve, another innocent death brought on by his own persistence. Fleming's Bond is racked with the complex emotional burdens that murder and death bring with it. And so, the drink, the girls, the gambling ensue, all to take his mind off of it. Bond and Honey Rider receive a more pleasurable confrontation to Quarrel's fiery demise. They are captured and sent for decontamination, and then received as though guests at a prestigious country club. In fact, it even looks like a prestigious country club, courtesy of Dr. No, who brings Bond into his lair to reveal his plan to disrupt American airspace launches, using a powerful radio beam. The illogical notion of the villain having to explain his plan has been pointed out so many times that I shall not dwell on it any longer. In adapting Fleming's novel, several changes were made due to budget constraints and creative decisions. The dragon tank chase was simplified, and Dr. No's lair was less elaborate compared to the novel. The film streamlined some of the novel's subplots for a faster-paced narrative. Ken Adams' design for Dr. No's lair was slate and stone, and featured a futuristic and highly stylised interior with large palatial spaces and bold, dramatic lighting, and it set a new standard for on-screen villainous hideouts. Again, this look was achieved with minimal resources, as we know the budget was less than a little bit modest. The set is a subsurface lair where culture and science, fine living and criminal activity are all on display. See, look, there's the Duke of Wellington, the painting stolen in the late summer of 1961, a well-timed current event, but the joke still plays today for those in the know, with Connery's double take drawing our eye to it. This room featured a large panoramic aquarium that gave an exotic feel to the villain's hideout. To save costs, Adam used a projector to show the footage of the fish, but when they realised at the last minute that no one had filmed any fish footage, the stock footage they used in a pinch came out a little oversized in the process. So a line was planted into the movie, Dr. No explaining to Bond about how the glass magnifies the fish. Minnows pretending to be whales. Adam frequently employed forced perspective in his designs, creating sets that appeared much larger and more complex than they actually were. This technique involved constructing parts of the set at different scales to trick the eye into perceiving depth and distance. Sets were very often repurposed and redressed to serve multiple scenes, which was a common practice in the film industry, but executed with particular skill by Adam to ensure that the different settings felt unique. Dr. No's character also saw some modifications. His background and motives are explained more thoroughly in the book, including his affiliation with the Soviet Union. In the film, his connection is shifted to the organisation Spectre, which serves as a recurring antagonist in many of the Bond films. This alteration was made to establish a consistent and formidable enemy for Bond, providing continuity in a broader narrative for the film series, but also to avoid any international lawsuits that may have arisen if chosen to go down the Schmerz route. Bond escapes from his cell and sabotages Dr. No's reactor. Now, I have a lot of love for Ken Adams, but at the back end of this movie, some of the set designs do show their age, and some of the model work is not very convincing in the modern HD and 4K formats. In the end, Bond kills Dr. No by drowning him in the reactor cooling pool, not guano as in the book. There's a whole rare seabird and guano dealing subplot from the book that's missing in the film. Bond rescues Ryder and they escape in a boat as Dr. No's lair explodes. The film ends with Bond and Ryder adrift at sea before being picked up by a naval ship, until Bond casually undoes the rope and they drift off together. Despite the budget limitations, or perhaps because of them, Dr. No turned out to be a tremendous success upon its release in 1962. It earned nearly $60 million at the box office, an impressive return on its pitiful budget. The film was well received by both critics and public. Critics praised Sean Connery's portrayal of Bond, noting his charisma and suaveness. The film's blend of action, suspense and wit set it apart from other spy movies of the time, establishing a new standard for the genre. In the end, casting Connery as Bond turned out to be a brilliant decision. He defined the role and set the standard for future Bonds, blending sophistication with a gritty, tough edge that perfectly captured the essence of Fleming's character. The initial scepticism gave way to widespread acclaim, and Connery's Bond became an iconic figure in cinema history. The shot of his first introduction at the casino and of him executing an unarmed assailant in cold blood are both scenes which, with Connery's cool delivery, helped to define the character and have become iconic cinematic moments. Dr. No successfully established many elements that would define the Bond franchise. It had laid the groundwork for a cinematic legacy that has spanned over 6 decades, continuously evolving while staying true to its roots. But as a film, it's still a very good film for the time and on the budget. Viewed through a modern lens, yes, it's problematic, especially if you so wish to focus on certain morally outdated aspects as race or sexual preference. But these were the sensibilities of the time. Okay, so it's not perfect. There's still a few ropey bits of rear screen projection and some obviously sped up action footage, dodgy slow motion model footage and other low budget techniques that have dated the film. But ultimately, Dr. No is still the first real Bond. The first time that the Eon formula plays out, laying the foundation for the juggernaut of success that was to follow. It still stands the test of time as an enjoyable, if not nostalgic movie. The success of Dr. No in 1962 and the subsequent Bond films had a profound impact on the cinema landscape, revolutionising the action-adventure genre and setting a template for spy films that followed. The commercial and critical triumph of the first James Bond film provided Eon Productions with the confidence and financial backing to continue producing the Bond movies, cementing the character as a cultural icon and paving the way for the long-running franchise. Dr. No introduced audiences to a sophisticated blend of action, exotic locations, glamorous lifestyles and charismatic lead character, and this combination proved to be immensely popular and inspired a wave of similar films and television series. For instance, the Harry Palmer series, starting with the Ipcress File in 1965, featured a more grounded and gritty spy compared to Bond, yet it clearly drew from the espionage, intrigue and stylistic elements popularised by Dr. No. Similarly, the Matt Helm films, beginning with The Silencers, 1966, and the Derek Flint series with Our Man Flint, 1966, borrowed heavily from Bond's formula, incorporating humour, gadgets, and an air of suave confidence. Clint Eastwood's The Eiger Sanction, 1975, echoes many elements of the James Bond films, drawing notable parallels and inviting comparisons. Like Bond, Eastwood's character Dr. Jonathan Hemlock is a sophisticated and highly skilled operative, blending intellect with physical prowess. The film's plot, revolving around espionage, assassination and a mission in exotic locations, mirrors the globe-trotting adventures typical of Bond. Both series feature charismatic leads who exude confidence and charm, often entangled in romantic liaisons. The use of elaborate stunts and action sequences in the Eiger Sanction, particularly the perilous mountain climbing scenes, reflect the high stakes and visually spectacular nature of Bond's escapades. Additionally, the film's incorporation of a memorable villain and complex covert operations further solidifies its place within the spy genre, heavily influenced by Bond's legacy. However, Eastwood's film also infuses a distinct rugged American persona and grittier realism, setting it apart from the polished, suave world of James Bond, thus blending homage with a unique stylistic identity. The influence of Dr. No extended beyond direct imitations. Alfred Hitchcock's North by Northwest in 1959 predated Bond, but its success reaffirmed the viability of sophisticated spy thrillers. Post Dr. No, Hitchcock's Topaz in 1969 reflected the espionage intrigue that audiences had come to love. On television, the impact was seen in series like The Man from U.N.C.L.E. 1964 to 1968, which combined espionage with a touch of the fantastical, and Mission Impossible 1966 to 1973, which emphasised high-stakes missions and clever gadgetry, both clearly influenced by Bond's success. The Bond films also set new standards for action sequences, special effects and production values. The grand set pieces and exotic locations become a hallmark of the series, pushing other filmmakers to elevate their game. The spectacular chases and fight scenes in movies like Indiana Jones series, which began with Raiders of the Lost Ark in 1981, and later the Bourne films, starting with The Bourne Identity 2002, show the lasting influence of Bond's action-packed escapades. Dr. No also plays a significant role in shaping the portrayal of the spy genre's villains and secondary characters. The archetype of the sophisticated, sinister antagonist and the inclusion of memorable henchmen became staples, as seen in films like The Incredibles 2004, which features a Bond-esque villain, and Austin Powers' International Man of Mystery 1997, a direct parody of the Bond films that highlights these tropes humorously. In essence, the success of Dr. No was a catalyst that not only ensured the longevity of the James Bond franchise, but also left an indelible mark on the cinematic portrayal of espionage, action and adventure. The film's blend of style, charm and thrills set a new standard, influencing countless productions and shaping audiences' expectations for generations. And that just about wraps our deep dive into Dr. No, the very first film of the iconic James Bond series. As we tick Dr. No from our list, we look forward to delving into each subsequent Bond film, uncovering the artistry and evolution that make this film series legendary. The iconic performances of different actors portraying Bond, and the ever-evolving style and storytelling that keeps audiences captivated. But don't worry if you're not a die-hard Bond fan, we will still be reviewing and discussing a variety of other movies and series as normal, ensuring there's always something for everyone. So stay tuned, because whether it's the world of espionage or another cinematic adventure, there's plenty more exciting content coming your way on WN Movie Talk Podcast. So check us out on Facebook if you want to get in touch. We're over on Instagram, or you can email us at wnmovietalk@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. So thanks for joining us. Remember to subscribe to us on whatever podcast platform you're listening to us, and give us a rating and a comment if you can, to show that you've been enjoying the show. And we see you next time in the Bond series, when we discuss From Russia with Love from 1963. Until then, keep watching and enjoying great films. Cheers.